everything that I tell you is the gospel truth according to St. Brian.
Ooh, yeah.
Okay, for those of you who were not here last week, we are into our second half-truth belief, which is God helps those who help themselves. And we spent the class last week talking about this. Just a quick review of what we talked about last week. First of all, the statement God helps those who help themselves is not found anywhere in the Bible at all. It doesn't even kind of match with the general theme of the scriptures at all. But there is nevertheless one sense in which it is kind of true. And we talked about the fact that, and we get it confused. We should do everything we can to help ourselves, okay? But there are people in all kinds of circumstances who simply and positively have no way of helping themselves. That doesn't mean that God doesn't help them, okay? So, it's fundamentally not biblical. And so we're going to jump into it from there today and finish this up today. I have a question, a couple questions I'd like you to toss around for a minute. In times of distress, when we're really stressed out and we've got overwhelming problems facing us, why, at that point, why do we cry out to God for help?
Nowhere else to go.
Yeah,
Nowhere else to go.
That's right.
He's constant. He's constant.
He's constant. We know He's there.
He usually gives me some sort of peace.
It gives you some sort of peace and hope.
Right.
Okay. Whereas you might not be able to find it anywhere else.
Right.
Well, we reach that bottom point where we realize we can't do it ourselves.
Right.
We have to go there.
Exactly.
And if we did that on a regular basis, then
So what you're saying is that we get to a point where we can't do it ourselves. We cry out to God for help. But what you're doing is proving the whole theme of the lesson. Right?
well, we cry out to God for help.
Because we can't help ourselves.
Because we can't help ourselves, and it's like, now what do I do?
So the whole thing about God helps those who help themselves, you just shot it to pieces.
No, because he'd already tried to help himself and it didn't work, so now he's asking God again. No, so see, it's both ways there.
But we walk away from it so often instead of every day turning to God. And if we only do it in times of trouble, then...
But that's typical. That's typical human.
It's typical human behavior.
You know, that you never say anything to God, or you never pray until all of a sudden you're in deep distress, and then all of a sudden you're praying like crazy for God to help. But that's basically why we cry out to God to help us, because we understand that in dire need, God will help us. Now, we talked about last week how, you don't just say to God, this is the situation, would you please solve it for me, and then sit back and wait for God to solve the problem. That's not the way.
Some people do.
Some people do, but that's not
And then they're
the way
disappointed.
I have a cousin like that.
And they're disappointed and say God's not there.
Right, right. And I have a cousin like that. She and her husband, he lost his job,
Nothing.
and they were desperate. And they sat around weeks after weeks, month after month, and his attitude was, God will provide. Well, at what point are you going to go out and try to find a job, Well, that brings me to the second question I wanted to ask. In terms of this belief, God helps those who help themselves, whether you accept that, just slam it hard and it'll be fine. There you go.
Now we're here for the
That's women power.
That is.
Wonder Woman.
If this is true, then in what way is God's grace involved in all of this?
That's original. The grace is original. So
Grace
he's-
is original.
It comes
Wanna
with-
Elaborate.
It comes with the choice of faith that God is there and cares for us and loves for us. And the moment we make that choice of accepting His love, His grace is there.
His grace is there. Okay, Bruce, you were about to say something.
Yeah, what was it?
I don't know.
I'll get back to you.
You need more coffee.
Well, that's, in Methodist teaching, that's a perfect example of prevenient grace. Tribulation is one of the things that drives us to God. I have a personal experience that did it for me. I rejected Him all the way up to 96, and I was diagnosed with a melanoma cancer in my retina, in my eye, and the doctors tried to come to an agreement on whether they were going to take the eye out to save my life or not, or go to the special treatment. Well, I was driving home from that diagnosis, and I hadn't spoken to my wife yet. And on the way in the car, I stopped at a green light, going up back home. This was in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. I just left the university. And I got to that traffic light, and I said, God, I need a little help here. Because the doctors aren't saying they can cure it. They're trying to save my life now, so I'm going to lose the eye. And is there anything you can do for me? Because I know you and I haven't discussed anything. And I had that conversation with him at a light, and that started me on the Christian journey in 97. And but it took tribulation and Lewis has a great statement. He says, God will take you in even though you choose Him last.
Okay.
He'll still do it, and that's grace.
Lard, you had something you were
The thing about praying for me is once I exhaust all of my splendiferous intellect and all of my skills and all of my power, once I ask, then all of a sudden I'm not alone. Then all of a sudden it's two of us. And all that worry is gone. Well, lo and behold, I think better when I'm not panicking and worrying and burning up vitamin C. Then I go, okay, what's the problem? Well, that's not what I thought it was. That's okay. That I can fix, and I have to remember it's that step towards God called praying or meditating that gets me in that place where I can think. And half the time it works out.
That's really good.
Any comment from anybody else at this point? Yes, sir.
You know, well, God answers all prayers. Some people don't think, you know, if something doesn't work out that God isn't listening. But God does answer all prayers. One of His answers is, yes, here it is. One of His answers is, yes, but you have to wait a while. It's going to take me a while to get things worked out. Another answer is, no, that's no good for you.
Yeah, we don't like that answer.
Yeah.
I'm preparing your soul for eternity. That's why it's no, because
That's
I know
right.
what's best for you.
That's right.
And the last one is, no, but I have a better plan. I'm going to work on this better plan
Right,
for you.
right. I think when we say, if we say, God helps everyone who comes to Him for help, doesn't make any difference whether you're able to help yourself or whether you cannot help yourself. And that's what I see as God's grace, because God's grace is a free gift to anyone who will accept it. And so that's another reason why I think this idea of God helps those who help themselves is not really true at all. God expects us to do what we can to help ourselves.
That's the definition of prevenience.
Right. And He is there to continue helping us along the way. But for people who are completely and positively in a hopeless situation, can't do anything to help themselves, God still helps those too, and He usually does it through other people.
Mm-hmm.
That He motivates or gives the compassion to try and help. Well, God's help for the helpless is actually what we would call grace, if you think about it. There's a second way in which this belief is not really in line with biblical truth that we haven't talked about yet. Sometimes we cannot help ourselves, but it's not because we're poor, and it's not because we're stupid, and it's not because we're destitute, and it's not because of any other reason. it's because we have descended so far into sin and despair that we are beyond helping ourselves.
I'm having a great deal of difficulty recovering from this election. And
Uh-oh, here we go.
I struggle constantly, and I have two sisters, both of whom voted for Trump. And it was just yesterday that I had the courage from God to speak with my younger sister. And it was very painful. I still have to talk to my middle sister, whose husband is a racist. And I am really, really
Distraught.
distraught.
Well, I can tell
Well,
you,
join the club. We've all got racists in our family. We've all got, every one of us have something that we don't agree on. But if you can agree on loving one another from your heart and forget all the other stuff on the outside, then you're able to get rid of that. Just say, I love you, I don't care what you do, I don't care how you feel, I love you.
this is something that...
Sandy, thanks for driving in today.
Where'd that come from?
Because, for example, now we have this group of, what, about 15, 18 of us here today. I know for a fact there are people in this group here today that voted for Trump. And I know for a fact that there are people who voted for Clinton, and I know for a fact there are some people here who refuse to vote at all because they didn't like anybody. Everybody's entitled to all their own perspectives and everything else. But this group of people right here would be willing to support each other and love each other in any kind of a circumstance.
That's right.
In any kind of a circumstance where anybody in this class was in need of help, compassion, support, or whatever, they would get it from everybody else, and it has nothing to do with Trump or Clinton or anybody else. Or any of the above. So it's one of those things where, like anything else, you just have to back off and say, you know what? I didn't cause the problem. I didn't, and there's nothing I can do about it. And so I need to learn how to live with it. And one of the best ways of doing that is to trust in each other and help each other through and be done with it. Any other comment before we get any deeper into that?
Yeah, because what I thought of immediately is the part of the New Testament where it says, you know, when you're just so distraught you don't know what to say, that just to groan, and your groans the Holy Spirit understands and takes them up. And sometimes I am so distraught and in such despair I can't put it into words.
Right, right. And you know, this is something we'll be talking about much later this year. It has to do with trust, and trust is one of the biggest problems I have. I have a very difficult time trusting anything. I've been so conditioned in my life to distrust. It's very hard for me to let go and trust. And we'll get into this later, but it's a very big issue. By the way, I've decided after we're through with this series, the next series we're going to do all has to do with trust. Trusting in God. So anyway, let me move along here. God is the God of the hopeless cause. Okay? God is the God of the hopeless cause. And you know what? What's even worse? He loves sinners.
He loves me.
Yes, he does. He loves sinners. He's the God of the hopeless cause. In the darkest valley with the destitute person, he's there. He's the God who brings light into darkness. He helps people, even in the worst of circumstances, to find peace, even in times of great anxiety and despair. He's a God who redeems, forgives, and rescues, and all of that is part of His grace. Would you agree with this? We all receive blessings from God, whether we deserve it or not.
Oh, yes.
Yep.
Oh, yes.
You want an answer to the question as to why bad things happen to good people and good things happen to bad people? God showers the blessings down, and they fall wherever they fall. And we're grateful for the blessings that fall upon us. Linda and I, as many of you know, have been through a very difficult couple of years.
Well, 4.
And how many months and how many
4
years?
years, 2 months, and
It's
13
been a
days.
long, difficult haul and very expensive in a lot of ways. But in between all of that, we are still blessed with so many things. And you have to reorganize your brain to concentrate on the blessings and not concentrate on the bad things and forget the blessings are there. You know?
You know, the only thing really that gets between us and God is our ego.
Right.
That's what stands in the way.
We can do it better, right?
And that's,
Quicker.
Or how could you do that to me?
Yeah, right.
You know.
Well, am I glad I don't have an ego? Anyway, we receive blessings from God even though we don't deserve them. We know that it's not a matter of us earning those blessings because, you know, that's not the way God works. God does not only give us what we earn, the blessings are given freely. Even at times when we've made an utter, complete mess out of things.
And oftentimes we're given blessings we never expect.
We
Out of
never
a
expect.
horrible situation. I mean, out of this horrible situation, we got our granddaughter Chloe. And, you know, I mean, it's horrible. I mean, it's just like all of a sudden, when you're down in the dumps and you think whatever, then we were able to have our only grandchild. And it has been a blessing, but it also it was a bad situation. I mean, it didn't come out of
A good
Mary
situation.
Poppins and Doris Day movies, you know. So I think sometimes, even the worst of times, something good happens. Arthur Robinson, our previous minister, used to always say that out of every bad comes the good. And I think, oh, really?
Yeah.
Well, I have to believe that now. I have to believe that.
Well, we talked about that in our last lesson, everything happening for a reason, and we talked about the fact that God has a way of bringing something good out of just about every bad thing that happens. Mm-hmm. That's what He does. And I think the example we even mentioned was a couple of parents whose son was murdered.
Right.
And their reaction to that was to create a huge foundation to help people in similar circumstances. So you end up taking a horrible, horrible event, and lo and behold, something really beautiful has come out of that. And that's the way God works. But even when we make a complete mess out of things, to the extent that we can't even possibly fix things anymore, guess what? God still extends mercy.
And they do get fixed.
And they do get fixed. And this is the very essence of grace. So through the course of our lives, we need help at all kinds of points along the way. God not only meets our needs at the very basic level, what was it, Maslow's hierarchy, food, shelter, clothing. God meets us at that point, but He also does it through people, community, as people act together in support of each other and show compassion and assist and support each other. God also provides for our higher needs. Interesting that God knew all about Maslow before Maslow did, isn't it? Acceptance, love, hope, peace, comfort, forgiveness, inner strength, all those kind of things. As human beings, as Adam Hamilton says in his book, as human beings, we really need to know that our lives have some value. That's very important. We need to have a purpose. We need to have a reason for living. We need to feel fulfilled. We need to feel satisfied. And these things are, too, are all met by God's gracious work in our lives. A couple examples that Adam Hamilton provides. Adam Hamilton is the author of this series that I'm using for these lessons. He says the week he met with a grieving couple. They were longtime members of his church, and they volunteer in congregational care ministry, visiting and providing comfort to other people who are experiencing a loss. But now they were experiencing a loss of their own, the death of their 34-year-old son. They told me they didn't know how people made it through such a time without faith, without knowing that they would see their child again one day. But even with faith, it was difficult. The couple told me they felt God's presence and grace carrying them through the terrible loss. They were also amazed by the way God's people in their church family had surrounded them with love and sustained them. That's God working through other people. He says 3 days before he talked to this grieving couple, he had met with a mother who had lost her teenage son earlier in the year. And she told him how in the dark days following his death, she essentially had stopped functioning. She said, I felt like a building had fallen on me. She said, I couldn't breathe. I couldn't eat. I couldn't take care of myself. I couldn't even dress myself. I was like a little child. She told me that two things had sustained her through the hardest moments. When she couldn't eat, her friends and church family brought her food and made her take nourishment. When she couldn't get out of her pajamas in the morning, her girlfriends helped her get dressed and meet the day. When she could not help herself, God worked through other people to help her. But she also felt God's hand directly. In the depth of her grief, and even now, she heard God whisper to her, He's safe with me. He's in my arms. You don't have to be afraid. As she confronted that higher level of needs, she found that her faith in God and God's work in her life had saved her. Okay? God helps those who can't help themselves. This reminds us of the scripture reading we used earlier last week, Psalms 18, verses 6 and 16. In my distress I called to the Lord. I cried to my God for help, and from his temple he heard my voice. My cry came before him into his ears. And in verse 16, he reached down from on high and took hold of me, and he drew me out of deep waters. That was part of the scripture we used for this particular lesson. Two more examples of God helping the helpless, again from Adam Hamilton. He says he thought of a couple who came to one of the pastors at his church in a time of great distress. Through their tears, the husband related how in his constant business travel, he had found himself watching internet pornography, which eventually resulted in his calling a woman to his hotel room for sex. This began to be a pattern in his life. When his wife eventually found out, it shattered her world. The husband came to his senses. He did not want their marriage to fail, but by that time he was at the bottom of a deep pit he had dug for himself. He wondered if there was any hope for someone like him, someone who knew that by all rights he didn't deserve forgiveness, he didn't deserve grace. The wife wondered whether she could find healing. Both feared that their marriage could not be saved. They met with one of our pastors, a wonderful counselor through whom God works. She told the husband that there was always hope if he turned his life back toward Christ, because Christ is in the business of redeeming those who are broken, whether or not they deserve it. She told the couple she did not know if their marriage could be saved, but she thought it was possible if both of them were willing to pray and work at it. And he says they were still married today.
Bless that wife. Bless that wife.
Yes, well, I think of a man who spent most of his life living for himself, for wealth and affirmation from other people. He was driven to succeed, but that quality led him to be away from his family and uninvolved in their lives. It also led him to drink. Over time, he became helpless to control his craving for alcohol. As a consequence, he lost the job that mattered so much to him. He nearly lost his family. When it seemed there was nowhere else to turn, he turned to God. Though he did not deserve it and could not earn it, he felt God's mercy and forgiveness. He turned his life over to God and asked for God's mercy and grace, and found in that a second chance and a new beginning. In that first instance I read, and I said that couple was still married, many years later they were willing to work to help themselves, but they had to begin with complete trust and faith. And that's what helped them move forward. The beginning of their journey back to a wholeness in their marriage came from trusting that God would help them to do what they themselves would have been unable to do all by themselves. Here's a quote. "I tried helping myself for most of 45 years. It wasn't until I surrendered to the fact that I am powerless that God gave me the strength to overcome my weakness." Does that sound familiar to anybody?
Mm-hmm.
You know, that's something that it took me longer than 45 years to figure that out. It took me about 65 or 70 years to figure that out. In my case, I have no control over anything. I spent most of my life thinking I was totally in control. When I found out that I wasn't in control of anything, it left me pretty shaken. We know that grace is not something we earn. We know it's not something we can buy. We know it's not something we can work for. We cannot help ourselves into grace. We can only ask for it and accept it as it's given to us. And in case you didn't know, Christianity is the only faith in all the world that believes that God's grace is free. All of the faiths specify that you have to do certain things to earn favor with God.
Jewels in my crown.
Yeah.
Jewels in the crown.
You know, the Jewish theory was you earn favor with God by keeping the law. The Muslim attitude is you earn favor with God by keeping the 7 pillars of faith. The Mormon attitude is you earn God's favor by doing good works. You know, they all say you have to earn God's grace. We're the only ones in Christianity that say it's absolutely free.
Not all Christians are that way.
Not all believe that, that's correct.
There's a merit system all the way through it.
Well, again, there's a, you know, in Methodism especially, grace is such a huge. Does anybody receive the Methodist magazine?
Interpreter.
The Interpreter? The last issue of Interpreter was from cover to cover, all about grace, and a lot of witnesses speaking as to the importance of grace. Psalm 121 verses 1 and 2, and I'm going to give this to you in my own words. I hope it means something to you this way, but this is the way I would say it. I raise up my eyes to the mountains, and I ask, where can I find help? I am answered, the God who created the universe offers you that help. That's from the psalm that says, I lift mine eyes up to the hills from whence cometh my help. Okay, so, see you guys.
You guys are gonna go earn,
Brian.
you earn your grace right now.
Convenient or otherwise.
So, in summary, to draw some conclusions about this second half-truth that we've been talking about. First of all, conclusion number 1, there are times when we cannot help ourselves. Period. No matter how much we want to try. We should always try to do so. We should always do what we can. God counts on us to do the best that we can. But sometimes, no matter how hard we try, that's not enough. There has to be something else for us to have. There are times when people cannot make it on their own, no matter how hard they try. And then God uses other people to become His hands and helpers. his answer to someone else's prayer, it's his instrument of grace. A second conclusion, there are times in life from which you simply cannot extricate yourself. Things you cannot save yourself from. You just don't have the strength, you haven't got the knowledge, you haven't got the resources, you haven't got any of the means to do it. That can become even more devastating if you don't believe you deserve any help, because you have concluded that you and you alone are responsible for the mess in which you find yourself. You know, you say to yourself, well, you know, this is all due to my own stupidity. I made some ignorant decisions. I got myself into this mess, and I'm going to have to get myself out of it. And you become very hesitant to ask for God's help because you feel guilty about it. You know, you don't want to go begging for help when you know it's all your fault. That's even more devastating. You have to be willing to admit to yourself, you know, I messed up, so everybody messes up. I can be forgiven for this. You know, God doesn't care if I've done something bad. All he cares about is what I'm going to do next. So, third, in such moments we cry out to God. And the reason is because, and we said this a little earlier, because God is the only one who is capable of helping us. Never mind how poor and pitiable we are. Doesn't make any difference how weak and afraid we are. God reaches out, he picks us up off the floor, cleans and dusts us off, and he says, I love you, I won't abandon you, I won't desert you under any circumstance whatsoever, no matter what you've done. He says, trust me, and together we can make things right.
Brian, can I back to point 2?
You can go back to anything you want.
I think part of that equation is probably one of most life's difficult lessons is self-forgiveness. And I think for a lot of people, you have to forgive yourself before, you know, you can forgive others and be open to the presence of God.
Well, I agree with you on that. I've been in a situation a couple times where I've thought to myself, you know, I'm being buried under this terrible problem.
Mm-hmm.
And I think to myself, the church says, you know, take your burdens to Jesus. Lay your burdens at Jesus' feet. And I think to myself, you know, Jesus has got enough to worry about without my problems. You know, I don't feel right about dumping my stuff on him. I was brought up in an environment where I was told, you know, you got problems, face them and deal with them.
Right.
Don't dump your problems off on somebody else. Don't ask somebody else to solve your problems. Do it yourself.
Yep. As a matter of fact, it's the whole world raises their children on you reap what you sow.
That's right. And you were raised that way too.
Oh, absolutely. Elvis.
So when
it's
it
up
comes
to
to
me.
me just taking all that stuff and just dumping it
Yeah.
on Jesus, it's hard for me to do because I said, yeah, that just doesn't seem right.
That's right.
You dumb, honey. Keep dumping.
Well, I think also too, what Chris was saying about you have to forgive yourself for things, that's hard to do because it's guilt too, and guilt plays a big role in many
And
things in
shame.
our life. And so you gotta say, okay, this is ridiculous, you know.
Mm-hmm.
You have to understand, and this is so much against human nature that it's very difficult to understand. You have to understand that God loves the sinner. You have to understand that no matter what you've done, no matter how many times you've done it, no matter what, God is still willing to clean you up and start over. And human beings don't do that. So it's hard for us to understand that, you know.
Well, also another point is when Jesus, his second thing that he said was that love your neighbor as you love yourself. He wants you to love yourself.
That's correct.
And so even though you messed up, we all mess up. I mean, that's part of our human condition. And if God, who is perfect, can forgive you, who are you to say that I can't forgive myself?
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah,
usually that that feeling, I felt it when you get down on yourself, and it's really when you reach way back. You say, "Well, I'm down on myself because other people think I should be down on myself." It's always you reap what you sow. You got yourself into this mess, and that's what people are telling you. You know, you're in this mess because of you. So you carry that burden with you, and the only place you can go is to God. It's the only way you can unload that.
Right, and there's another thing that's closely related to that, and that is if you're in a mess, and people see you in this bad situation, say, well, you know what? Yeah, I'd be willing to help you, but for heaven's sakes, do something for yourself first.
Right. That goes back to the.
That's not the way it's supposed to work with Christians. You know, you're putting conditions on that person to do something before you're willing to do something.
And if you
God doesn't do that.
You could be down on yourself, and because you believe that's what the other people around you are thinking, and they may not be.
That's true.
Because
that's your own guilt doing that to you too.
And that's a lot. You go back to how you're raised. You know, you screw up. That's on you.
It's a behavior that you're taught when you're that big.
That's right.
That you never really get beyond.
You never break.
You never break.
Yeah.
You never break through that.
And I think for a lot of us who grew up, we're all closely the same age. I realize I'm a little bit older than most of you, but we're close to the same age. I was brought up to believe that as a man, as a man, I'm supposed to be in charge.
That's right.
And I'm supposed to solve all the problems. And if anybody needs something to lean on, they're supposed to be able to lean on me. And if you know, people need to rely on me, then I have to stand up and support them.
Right.
And it took me a long time in life to find out, you know, I'm just not capable of doing that.
Yeah. You get that drilled into you from day one. You get that drilled into you.
I know.
And then comes the feelings of guilt and
sure.
Absolutely.
And when you can't meet those expectations, then you feel like there's something wrong with you.
You fail. That's right.
And that's when you get down to that point is when you grow, because if you you know, when you're broken and you get to the point where you got nowhere else to go, then you realize you've got to grow out of that.
Why does growth have to be so painful?
It is.
And they called it growing pains when we were kids.
Yeah.
We don't have it. We're still
Brian,
on growing pains.
I think it's so that,
That's the
I
problem.
think it's so that we remember the pain and what came after the pain. You stick with the pain, you don't go anywhere. You stick with the pain and pray, you grow out of it. But without the pain, it floats away. But the pain, I remember the pain.
Yeah, there's a great saying. Again, I apologize for this, but Lewis is my man. He said, God whispers to you in your pleasure, speaks to you in your conscience, and yells at you in the pain. And pain is God's megaphone into a deaf world.
That's good. That's good.
Yeah.
Who said that?
God,
C.S.
Lewis.
C.S. Lewis.
Yeah.
Bruce Benke said that.
Bruce Benke did that.
Write that down.
Well, listen, guys, thank you all for coming today, and remember, we won't be meeting for a